Angela Brooks was a woman who had earned every inch of the life she lived. At 48, she wasn't just a resident of Rye, a quiet, gated suburb in North Carolina, she was a fixture. After 8 years in the neighborhood, Angela had carved out a respected space for herself. Her name etched in the good graces of the Homeowners Association, her brick house fully paid off, and her presence quietly acknowledged by those who mattered. But today wasn't about titles or responsibility. It was Saturday, and Angela, bone-tired from weeks of non-stop police work juggling rookie evaluations, crime reports, and city council demands, finally gave herself permission to pause. Slipping into casual cut-off shorts and a loose tank top, she stepped out into the Carolina heat with nothing but a towel, sunglasses, and a cold soda in hand. She wasn't Chief Brooks this afternoon. She was just Angela, a woman seeking stillness by the pool. This was her routine retreat, a simple comfort nestled in the heart of her neighborhood, the community pool. A short walk down the block brought her to its gate, and she entered without fanfare, waving lazily at Sean, the teenage lifeguard she'd seen every summer for years. She snagged her usual spot by the deep end, sighed into the lounge chair, cracked open her soda, and closed her eyes. For 10 golden minutes the world melted away, the hum of retirees thumbing through magazines, children cannonballing with squeals, and the sun warming her skin. Angela didn't need anything else. She had spent her career keeping people safe, solving problems, absorbing stress, but today she was simply unwinding. She didn't wear her uniform, and she didn't carry herself like someone demanding attention. That was never her way. The power she held wasn't in volume but in quiet certainty, a woman comfortable in her own skin. And as she sat there, blending into the life she'd helped build, no one would have guessed her role in keeping this peaceful place exactly that. Peaceful. Angela Brooks had seen the noise of the world, and today she chose the silence of a well-earned break. But as the day would soon prove, even peace can be tested, and true strength often reveals itself when least expected. Just as Angela Brooks was beginning to settle into her hard-earned moment of peace, the sharp click of approaching footsteps disrupted the lull. She peeked through her sunglasses, expecting a passing neighbor or a wandering child, but instead saw a tall white man in his mid-40s, standing too close and too stiff for comfort. Dressed in pressed khakis and a button-up far too formal for a poolside afternoon, he didn't carry a towel or a drink, just a pinched frown and the unmistakable posture of someone ready to confront. "Excuse me," he began, his voice coated with artificial politeness. "Do you live here?" Angela sat up slightly, soda still in hand, and responded calmly, "Yeah, I do." But the man wasn't satisfied. Arms crossed, smirk curling, he pressed, "Funny, I've never seen you. This pool's for residents only." His tone was clipped, the kind that barely hides suspicion. Angela met it with composure. "Been here 8 years, 4 houses down." Her voice was steady, unbothered, but his smirk held. Trouble had found her, in the form of Mark Tanner, a new neighbor she hadn't yet met but one already eager to play enforcer. Mark's suspicion wasn't based on any real violation. Angela had entered the pool gate like everyone else. But her relaxed demeanor, her skin color, and the absence of a visible key card were all the excuse he needed. He questioned her legitimacy, asked for proof, demanded she produce her pool pass, even as she explained who she was and where she lived. He brushed off her responses, circling her like a security guard on high alert, all under the guise of just keeping things legit. Around them, the pool continued humming, but heads began to turn, sensing the tension. Mark didn't relent, pressing for evidence, invoking rules, even bringing up his child's safety as justification. Angela, poised and cool, didn't flinch. "You decided I didn't belong before you even asked my name," she told him. The air shifted. More neighbors tuned in. The teenage lifeguard pulled out an earbud. A retired couple nearby paused their reading. The challenge wasn't just against Angela's right to sit poolside. It was a reflection of something deeper. Mark's assumptions, masked as concern, were rooted in bias. He saw a black woman alone and jumped to judgment. And despite her calm clarity, despite her composure, he doubled down, unaware he was digging himself into a hole that the entire neighborhood was now watching him fall into. Angela Brooks didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. While Mark Tanner escalated, circling like a self-appointed watchdog, Angela stayed anchored. Every word she spoke was calm, measured, not for his sake, but for her own dignity. She wasn't about to justify her presence with frantic explanations or apologies. "You're welcome to call the HOA," she said coolly. "They'll tell you who I am." Her refusal to jump through his hoops, to prove herself on command, only frustrated him more. He kept pushing, voice rising, attempting to cloak his suspicion in rules and safety concerns. "If you've got nothing to hide," he said sharply, "just show the card." But Angela didn't move. "You saw a black woman by herself and assumed something was off," she replied. The crowd around them had grown. Retirees, parents, teenagers, all now alert to the shifting air. Mark's crusade, once private, was now public. Still, Angela didn't waver. She let him unravel himself, word by word, until he stood exposed, not by force, but by contrast. Where he was loud, she was composed. Where he was suspicious, she was certain. She didn't shout to be heard. Her silence spoke louder. And then, when the moment was right, not out of anger but clarity, she reached into her bag and pulled out a slim black case. With a quiet flip, the badge inside gleamed under the sun. Raleigh Police Chief Angela Brooks. A hush swept through the pool. Mark, who had been so sure of himself, took a stunned step back. His mouth opened, closed. No words came. Angela stood, still calm, badge in hand. "You assumed," she said softly. "And that's the loud part." Around them, recognition settled in. Doris, the elderly neighbor in a wide sun hat, smirked with approval. Jim chuckled from his lounge chair. Even the lifeguard stood now, watching with wide eyes. Mark mumbled something, a half-formed apology, a backpedal wrapped in awkwardness, but it was too late. The pool had seen, and they remembered not Mark's mistake, but Angela's grace. She returned to her seat unfazed, slipped her sunglasses back on, and resumed her break like nothing had happened. No gloating, no grand gesture, just presence. In a moment designed to corner her, she held the line with unwavering strength. She didn't confront, she reflected, and in doing so she taught everyone watching that real power doesn't shout, it stands. Quiet, unshaken, What unfolded at the pool that day didn't stay there. The moment Angela Brooks revealed her badge and calmly dismantled Mark Tanner's assumptions, something subtle but powerful began to ripple through the Rye community. Whispers spread by evening, not as gossip, but as shared acknowledgement. People who had watched silently or from the corners now replayed the scene in conversations, texts, and quiet reflections. Her neighbors began seeing not just what had happened, but how it had happened, with control, dignity, and grace. Tara, a friend from 2 blocks over, texted Angela later that evening, "Heard you shut down some pool jerk today. Badge drop for the win?" Angela's reply was simple. Didn't drop it, just showed it. That summed it up. No performance, no ego. Just truth handled with composure. The community started responding, not with grand gestures but with quiet recognition. Doris showed up at Angela's door with homemade cornbread and a smile, saying, "You handled him good. Cool as ice." Folks noticed. Jim sent a message. "You're a rock. Let me know if you need backup." Even Sean, the young lifeguard who hadn't intervened, apologized in a text. "Sorry I froze. Won't happen again, Chief." These weren't just polite check-ins, they were acknowledgments of impact. The way Angela held her ground gave others a blueprint. It wasn't the badge that had hit hardest, it was the unwavering calm she carried when tested. By the next morning, Rye's streets had changed in tone. Angela noticed it during her usual jog. A teen slowed down, pulling out one earbud to ask, "You're the chief, right? That was dope yesterday," she replied with a small smile. "Standing up's not dope, it's normal." The girl nodded thoughtfully before jogging off, but Angela knew the moment had left its mark. Flyers on the community board now featured her photo. A subtle message scribbled underneath one read, "To the guy who told her to leave, read up." At the local cafe, the barista grinned and said, "You're blowing up on Nextdoor. Pool guy versus legend." Angela just rolled her eyes. She hadn't wanted attention. But it found her anyway, not for being loud, but for being steady. Her stance had struck a nerve, especially with the quiet watchers. Teens like Mateo, moms by the fence, neighbors who never said much but saw everything. And now, when they looked at her, they didn't just see a resident, they saw a presence. Someone who didn't just belong, but defined what belonging meant. What happened at the pool wasn't just about a man named Mark Tanner. Angela Brooks knew that. He was merely the face of something older, something subtler. The polite suspicion, the casual gatekeeping, the way a black woman could be asked to prove herself in her own neighborhood while others were waved through without a second glance. These weren't new to Angela. She'd faced them in boardrooms, council meetings, and sometimes just walking down the street. What made this moment different was who had been watching, and what they took from it. Angela didn't need to humiliate Mark or make a spectacle. She understood something deeper. That calm, unapologetic presence hits harder than any outburst. When she said, "You assumed," and that's the loud part, she wasn't just speaking to Mark. She was speaking to everyone who had ever made a silent judgment and called it concern. And she was speaking to those who had been on the receiving end too, telling them, without fanfare, that they didn't have to bend to be accepted. Her power came not from her title, but from her refusal to be rattled. That's what stuck with people. Days after the incident, it wasn't just about the police chief at the pool, it became about what people felt in that moment. The sting of recognition, the shift in perspective, the realization that they'd witnessed something more than a misunderstanding. Kids like Mateo started asking questions. Teens spoke of her with quiet awe. Parents told their children about grace, not just rules. It wasn't Mark's discomfort they remembered, it was Angela's control. Her calm had become a quiet lesson, passed from lawn chats to kitchen tables. Angela herself didn't seek change through confrontation, she simply stood firm. But that simple act began to shift something in her community. She showed that you don't have to yell to be heard and that strength isn't in how loud you speak, but in how solidly you stand. She didn't need to shame Mark into growth, she held up a mirror, and maybe, just maybe, someone else saw themselves in his place and decided to look a little longer before judging next time. Dignity doesn't posture, it doesn't demand, it simply exists, steady, visible, undeniable. And in that summer sun, Angela Brooks gave her neighborhood a glimpse of what that kind of dignity really looks like, and it stayed with them. As summer in Rye slowly faded into routine, Angela Brooks' name no longer needed an introduction. She hadn't sought to become a symbol, but her steady response at the pool had left a lasting impression, not through spectacle, but through the kind of grace that resonates in the quiet moments after. Days later, as she jogged past the community board, she spotted that same Know Your Neighbors flyer again, her photo from a past HOA event smiling back at her. Someone had scribbled, underneath it, "To the guy who told her to leave, read up." Angela chuckled softly. No need to respond. The message had taken on a life of its own. It wasn't about vengeance or public shaming, it was about awareness. Her calm had planted seeds. At Corner Brew, Jonah the barista greeted her with a grin. "Chief Brooks," he said, sliding her usual coffee across the counter. "Folks say you schooled him without even breaking a sweat." Angela smiled. But she knew what mattered wasn't the takedown. It was the tone she set, and how people carried it forward. The ripples continued in unexpected ways. Neighbors she barely spoke to waved more often. Mateo's mom shared how her son now saw her as a kind of hero. Even Sean, the teenage lifeguard who hadn't spoken up during the confrontation, messaged later, "Chief, you're solid. Got your back next time." The truth was, Angela never needed to fix Mark Tanner. He was just one of many who still operated with unconscious bias, but through her actions, she created space for others to see, reflect, and rethink, and that mattered more. The letters that showed up in her mailbox days later said as much. One was from a parent who wrote, "My daughter learned more from watching you than she has from a dozen school assemblies." Another, unsigned, simply read, "Grace beats barking. Thank you." Angela tucked those notes away, not out of pride, but as reminders of what her presence had meant. Her badge might have been the thing that caught their attention, but her composure was what changed the air. It wasn't about heroics. It was about showing a better way to hold the line. And now, when someone was unfairly questioned or overlooked, maybe a neighbor would speak up, not because Angela was watching, but because she had taught them how. The poolside moment had passed, but its echo lingered, quiet and steady, just like the woman who caused it. One of the most powerful lessons from Angela Brooks' story is that true strength doesn't always shout, it stands. In a world that often rewards noise, her quiet dignity reminds us that calm presence can be just as impactful, if not more. For older generations who've weathered decades of social change and personal challenges, this story reaffirms a timeless truth. Respect is not demanded, it's earned through consistency, character, and grace. Angela didn't confront prejudice with fury, she met it with steady resolve, showing that integrity speaks volumes. It's a reminder that the way we carry ourselves, especially under pressure, can influence how others learn, grow, and respond. Whether as parents, grandparents, or mentors, we have the chance to model this kind of wisdom, to show younger generations that leadership isn't about dominance, but about grounding, patience, and self-respect. Angela's story invites us all to stand tall in our truth, to challenge injustice not with chaos, but with clarity. And in doing so, we leave behind more than just a good impression. We leave a legacy of quiet power and lasting impact.